Welcome to Parkside at 175, a podcast that testifies to the faithfulness of God. By looking back at His faithfulness, we're inspired to move forward for His kingdom. I'm your host, Justin Cook, and it's my great joy to serve as the lead pastor at Parkside. Today's conversation is a really fun one. The episode is titled Innovation for the Gospel, and we'll focus on creative methods that were used at Parkside to see the gospel go forward. I'm joined by two former pastors at Parkside, Rodney Rice and Jim Cook. Brothers, welcome. We're so glad you made time to be here today.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Yeah, I wonder if each of you could just briefly introduce yourselves to the listeners, maybe share a bit of what your role was on staff and kind of time frame that you would have been here, and then we'll dive in from there. Rodney, you want to get us started?
Sure. Justin, my wife Jimmy Lynn and I came here in 1992, and we were pursued by Dr. Tyler at that time, and he heard about us through Jim. Jim and I were college roommates, not roommates, but across the hall, and he and Susan were in our wedding and had known each other since college days. And so he was the one that told Pastor Tyler about us. And so when we did come, we came from Calvary Baptist Church in Covington, Kentucky, where Warren Wiersbe used to be the pastor. And so our role here was to build and to grow the worship ministry, the music ministry, to expand and grow the outreach of the music ministry through the Living Christmas Tree, through other productions throughout the year, which we did start the Passion Play, the 4th of July production, the children's musical grew during that time, but it was it all had an underlying purpose of reaching people with the gospel. And that was the whole purpose. And except for, obviously Sundays was worship, but the productions were truly an evangelistic way to touch people with the gospel and to tell them about Christ through the medium of music. And so we started the instrumental program, which grew to the orchestra and ensembles and the vocal ensembles. And so it was a wonderful time of ministry here at Bethesda. At that time, it was Bethesda. So
the Lord in His kindness brought you in 92, and you guys were here through 02, 10-ish years?
Yeah, 10 years.
11 years maybe?
10 years.
And it's interesting. So you came in 92. Mm-hmm. Pretty big church at that point.
We were at about 1,500, I think, on a Sunday. And during that time, I think we topped up to averaging around 1,800, something like that, if I remember right, Jim, something like that, somewhere in that ballpark.
It's interesting as you're talking about the use of music and productions to reach people with the gospel. Mm-hmm. What I'm kind of hearing in the background there is it doesn't matter how big your church is, how small it is, how big it is. There's always this pressure to be insular and inward focused. Mm-hmm. And it takes a ton of energy to say, who are the people around us who don't know Christ? And how are we going to go find them and reach them with the gospel?
Mm-hmm. Well, for years, and Jim can testify this as well, but Bethesda at that time, Parkside at that time, had as the logo, "We care, come and see."
And the joke on that, of course, was "Come see if we care."
Come see if we care. Yeah, well, that's the exact antithesis, really, of what the gospel is. Mm-hmm. People who don't know Christ, they're not going to come and see. We have to go show.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that was really a refreshing, really philosophical change that even though the logo didn't finally get axed for several years, but yet the philosophy finally did. Mm-hmm. And so that was a refreshing thing that, and with that, I convinced Pastor Tyler at the time, I said, you know what? I said, particularly for the 4th of July production. Now, people were coming to see the living Christmas tree. We'd sell out Christmas tickets every year, but for the 4th of July celebration, everybody loves a big patriotic production. There's fireworks and everything. Well, Brownsburg for years and years had the big carnival and everything down at Arbuckle Acres.
Mm-hmm.
And so I recommended to Pastor Tyler, you know what? We need to take this production where the people are. And they're not going to come here because everybody's down there at the park. And so he thought about it and consented. And so for several years, I can't remember how many, we took the whole production down to the park, and it was hugely successful. People heard about. We didn't. It wasn't a strong gospel presentation necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but they heard about Bethesda. They heard the music. They saw, and it gave them a reason to want to say, you know what, I might go check that out.
Yeah, Rodney, one of the images we use to try and encapsulate this gather to scatter kind of mindset, what you're saying, get out, is we talk about the church being an aircraft carrier.
Right.
Come together on Sundays,
Uh-huh.
every member's a fighter jet, and then you're sent out on mission every single week, and that reach is infinitely greater. And so for people who've come to Parkside more recently, I think it's interesting for them to hear this shift from you come to us and instead, no, we're going to go to you, is
Right.
20 years in the making, numerous iterations, probably not through production in the same way today that it was then,
Right.
but the underpinnings philosophically of that have been in the works for a while, but it takes time to flip a culture.
Oh, absolutely.
It takes time, and it takes consistency of leadership there. We'll dive into more of that. That's a helpful intro for our listeners. Dad, tell us about when you came and what your roles were, and kind of a brief introduction for listeners who may not know you.
Well, Susan and I were finishing up our master. I was finishing up my Master's of Divinity at Chattanooga, and I was a Christian Ed major, and wanted to work in church in the area of Christian education. And at that time, Pastor Tyler didn't have a Christian education pastor, but was looking to expand the pastoral staff to include a Christian education pastor, which is exactly what I wanted to do. And his role was to bring in new or pastors most of the time. There was a few exceptions that were new to the ministry, and bring them up here. And I was one of those. So I came in, and Susan and I came in 1984. Actually, we moved into Brownsburg on our first anniversary, June 4th, 1984. And then we're here from 1984 to 2006 as, you might think of it as family ministry pastor in today's jargon. In that time, it was called Christian Ed pastor. And so we were here for 22 years as a pastor.
Okay. Helpful. Thank you. In the time period that both of you guys were here, that 80s, 90s into early 2000s, was a time period that was really known for lots of new methods. Innovation for the Gospel is the title of the episode here. And so I wonder if for the listeners who may be less familiar with the history, if you could just give us some rapid fire. Here's a couple of the out-of-the-box ideas we tried. And I may come back and kind of ask some follow-up questions on each of those. But, Rodney, you talked about 4th of July production, going to Arbuckle Acres, saying where are people at, let's go to them. That's a great example of that. But if you guys kind of ping back and forth with, hey, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're trying this, we're trying that, just to give a frame of reference would be helpful.
Yeah, one of the things we started was Cradle Club. So we developed a packet of information and stuff that would be helpful for new families, regardless if they came to church or not. And at that time, we were able to get a hold of names and families that had babies in our zip codes that we were interested in. And so we started, and a number of people would go out on Cradle Club evangel, just try to reach out and say, hey, if you're ever looking for a church, we know one that you might be interested in. I think that was one thing that we started.
I'll pause you on that. That was one I was involved in as a kid.
You were.
Where
Right.
I recall, I don't know how you got the information of when somebody had a baby, but taking a bottle and a bib and some other basic baby necessities. Anytime anybody in Brownsburg had a kid, we were taking something to them within, I don't know what the time frame was, a week, 2 weeks after having a baby.
Yeah, well, it made it fun for me because then I could take one of my kids. You were on a number of times, and Joel and Jenna also. but I could take my kids. So I was spending time with kids as well as doing ministry, and that made it an enjoyable thing for me. And it also, when we got to the homes, enabled them to see, hey, this isn't just two guys wearing coat and ties or something, that are religious and doing the religious
tie.
thing.
What's that?
What's a tie, really? No kidding.
Were you guys riding bicycles too?
Really? No. It was just we tried to convey the idea of normal family, and if you're interested in looking for
we
a
took
church,
sleeping pills for parents.
really.
No, we
so-
didn't.
so
No,
Craig-
we didn't. That was a joke.
Yeah, good to clarify that you're not dropping off Ambien there. Okay, so Cradle Club was one thing. Rodney, what was another something that we've been trying?
Well, music, of course, was my primary focus, and so I had to specialize when I came. When I was at Calvary, I did a good bit of preaching on occasion, teaching Sunday school and adult classes. But when we came here, I mean, it was laser focused on music. A couple of things we did. We did some recordings that with choir and orchestra, and those seemed to have a real positive impact. And I know a lot of people got those recordings that didn't necessarily come to Parkside at the time, or that weren't even associated with ministry in any way. So
that's like mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
That's when, I mean, if you're thinking just historical timeline, some of the stuff out of Australia, Darlene Check, Shout to the Lord, some of that is coming online. But that was still a pretty emerging realm of like a church writing, recording. That was not, I mean, that's kind of mainstream type thing today, but it would not have been back then. I don't think. You could correct me if I'm wrong.
And that was one of the things that Pastor Tyler specifically told me he wanted us to do when we came. And because some people might remember this, may not, but when Pastor Tyler was here, he had a very effective ministry to professional baseball players. And through the Indianapolis Indians, and now a lot of those guys had gone out into the major leagues, but they'd come back to visit, and so he got feedback from them when he would ride with them in their cars and hear the music that they listened to, and realized that we needed to bring our music and worship music into the culture, into the age that we were living in. Well, we did that, but it was not met with 100% acceptance, because change is hard.
Yep.
And even though the majority of the people loved it, it was met with some resistance, which that always happens when you're trying to make change. Starting the orchestra was a huge change, because we're bringing, God forbid, drums and guitars into the church,
I remember the huge discussion we had, Rodney, about where would the orchestra pit be?
Yeah.
Because at that point, we're used to piano and organ, one on one side, one on the other side.
Right.
And when you were looking for where we needed an orchestra pit, where would we put it? The platform was big enough, but it ended up being over on the side, on the west side of the auditorium. And that was a huge change, to take out 6 or 8 pews, create miking, and the drums were new on. At that point. So
and really, I appreciate so much the leadership, Pastor Tyler, the other leadership on staff, agreeing to do that, because that was innovative.
Yep.
Like you said, Jim, going from piano and organ to a full-blown 40-piece orchestra every week, that was different.
Well, it takes a pretty big investment on the front end without a guarantee it's going to pay off.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then that's a part of just, hey, we're going to take this step and trust the Lord. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have to probably eat some crow and pivot a little bit. But we're trying to take bold steps here for the Lord and trust Him to bless them.
Well, I remember our first year here to do the Living Christmas Tree. We didn't come on site until October. Well, we had already sent the music ahead of time for the choir to start working on. Well, all the years prior, they had always performed the Living Christmas Tree with pre-recorded orchestra tracks. Okay. And so that was just understood. That's how you do it. And so that's the way we did our first one. But then after the first of the year, well, in fact, even before, we began to build the instrumental program. And that's when, we began corralling people who used to play instruments, some of our high school kids that were good players, and some adults that brushed off the cobwebs of their horns and instruments and started playing again. And it really began to come together. And so our second living Christmas tree, I proposed to Pastor Tyler at the time. I said, Doc, we want to do this with live orchestra. He says, no. It's we've never done that before, and we can't. All the people that are going to be here for the living Christmas tree, we can't chance on, And I said, all right, here's what we'll do. We'll see. They always used to pre-record the choir at the up in Airborne Studios, and then they would play their voices in addition to them singing live with the pre-recorded orchestration. I said, okay, we will go pre-record the choir just as we've always done and use it as a backup if needed. So that kind of settled his nerves a little bit. You remember that? And so, but I said, I believe we can do it. I believe we can do it. We can do our second living Christmas tree with live orchestra. Well, thanks be to God. I put my neck out there on the train track, but it happened, and everybody loved it. And the people in our church at Parkside at the time who had never gotten to use their talent playing instruments finally got that opportunity, and to them, this was a huge opportunity of ministry for them. And
the same thing happened to us with VBS.
Yeah.
When we went from I recommended we go from a 2-week VBS to a 1-week VBS, and the word was, you better make it work. Well, first of all, it won't work. Don't do it. And then he thought about it and said, okay, if you're going to do it, make sure it works. Well, the fact was I had to earn trust that I could make a 1-week VBS work, and they were used to doing 2 weeks of VBS and making that work like that. So, right. But after you'd earned a trust, it was working.
Right. And that's true, because anytime you propose changes, you have to have a little trust collateral there that the leadership looks at, and you have to kind of have proved yourself a little bit to say, hey, we tried this and it worked, and we think we can take this next level, and we think it's going to work too. And so you have to kind of spend a little of that collateral to make aggressive and innovative changes, and you have to build some trust.
Yeah, and it takes a spirit too of saying, hey, we're going to give this thing a shot.
Yeah.
And you got to have people, leadership buy in, but people in the church got to say, hey, I don't totally see it, or maybe I got some hesitation or some risk, but we're gonna be all in, because if you try and do a halfway cannonball, you're not going to have a splash.
Yeah, right. Well, Jim had the same experience in VBS. I mean, you had so many people taking weeks of vacation, of their own vacation,
right,
to spend their time doing VBS in the summertime.
Men and women.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we went to 1 week VBS, it made it where guys would give and ladies would give a week vacation. They couldn't give 2 weeks, but they could give 1 week.
Right.
And many of them did. I wanted to suggest one other thing that would be new.
Let's pause for just a second. When you're talking, wherever you want the mic is fine, but you're looking to the left and you're going like this and then no longer talking into it. And the front portion of that right there is where you get your greatest receptivity.
Okay.
So that's that. And then, Rodney, you're wanting a little more.
Oh, I was just going to tell. No, that's better. Yeah. That's
great.
Better.
Okay.
Great.
Is that enough for you?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, give us one thing that's new that you would add to that.
We added what we called MED teams, missions education teams, and we wanted to make sure it was parent-led, so it involved one parent, at least one parent, hopefully 2 parents, and one child that were interested in missions as kids, And then we had assignments, books to read, things they could do, and ways they could be involved. And that was nobody else I knew of was doing that, but we made it where if kids were interested in missions, they had a path forward to at least look into missions more. And Eddie, maybe, and others have pursued missions to be a part of their life. Maybe as a result of that, but certainly by God's grace, that happened. And that was kind of a fun thing to look back at now as we experimented with challenging kids to personal evangelism now, maybe global evangelism later, but at least personal evangelism now, and getting kids to think about that, not waiting until they became youth or adults before they became.
But ballpark, when would that have been?
I think we would have started med teams around 1990, maybe the early 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't remember hearing about that before, but I want to tell our listeners a story about that. I heard a basketball coach one time at the end of the season, a parent asked him, high school coach, hey, was this a successful season? And he said, I don't know. We'll find out in 20 years. And his point was it wasn't about wins and losses. He was trying to train young men to be godly fathers, husbands, leaders, so on and so forth. And I want to tell our listeners, in the last 15, 18 years, Parkside has sent like 7 or 8 missionary families. And people say, boy, how do you do that? So you look back 30 years ago at somebody making an investment there in your 6-year-olds, and it reframes a vision. And then way down the road, some planted, some watered, some harvested, but the Lord gave the increase. And you don't know how the Lord's going to use it. But I want to call out that long-term trajectory that's key for faithfulness in our day. Because I may not see the fruit right away.
Yeah,
I think that's exactly what it came down to was we had to be content with long-term investments and maybe not seeing the results immediately. That if we sowed the right seed, if we just kept going, we felt like we were doing the right thing, and eventually we would see that, and that's kind of what happened. And but it took time to, at least in like Susan and my heart and life, to wait it out and say, we think we're doing the right thing. We think we're planting seeds of evangelism now. If it leads to something else, we'll know in 20 years, maybe 30 years. But right now, we think that's the right thing to do, to plant that in our kids. And then God has done some pretty good things as a result of that. But that was started from what I felt like we needed to have one parent involved, that if it didn't have one parent involved, it wouldn't go anywhere. They weren't going to read a book. They weren't going to be interested. We tried to make it where this was family-led, not just the Christian ed pastor thinks it's a good idea.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And I have to say, Justin, when we came here to Parkside back then, I was so impressed with how Jim and Susan integrated missions into every aspect of children's ministries. And I have to say, they had one of the most exciting children's ministries on the west side of Indianapolis during that time. And I mean, we were flooded, and we were flooded with young families. You know, of course, we were a whole lot younger then too. But we had.
You said the quiet part out loud.
I did. Yeah. We were a whole lot younger back then. And, you know, that attracted younger couples. But when they came with children, they saw their children having an incredibly good time here and learning and being challenged. And it was so refreshing to see. I've never seen any church before or since that I've been directly involved in that's had that kind of influence in the kids. And now, years later, we've seen it pay off in many, many ways.
Yeah, amen. I do think for me, and probably for most people, there's like a pull. It's a pretty strong pull to wanting to see immediate fruit. Like, I want to see this thing working. I want to see it going right now.
Yeah.
And we all kind of know intuitively, I ought to play the long game, but I kind of want to win the short game too.
Right.
You know, you guys have been at this for a while, and I'm sure that struggle is still real in your own hearts in various ways. You just got a little more experience on it. How do you fight to keep that long game perspective, especially in trying new stuff where there's pressure for it to work right away? Like, how do you guys do that? How can you help our listeners think through that?
I think that's a great question. That's a really, really deep question too. I think you have to rely on the faithfulness of God, that God's going to do things, that you just keep doing the right thing. You keep practicing the right things in your personal life, my personal life, and in our church life and our family life. And for sometimes years, you may go without seeing something that's a real check mark of fruit kind of thing. But it's, to me, relying on the grace of God and trying to do the right thing day to day, whatever that is, in my own personal life, in my own devotional life, in my family life. And if I saw God do great things, awesome. If not, others have gone years without seeing any fruit. And I was blessed that I had the support of the pastoral team that was here and encouragement from them, certainly from my wife. And so I was in a position where I wasn't left out on an island, but I was also thankful that pastoral team, all of them, Rodney, others here sitting right where we're sitting, were encouragements to me and a blessing to us. And I think you just focus on doing the right thing today and thinking the right thing today, and in my heart, the right thing today. And then when there's sin, there's confession, repentance, and turn around tomorrow. And the Lord's mercies are new every morning, and thankful for his new mercies every morning. And I think now, 41 years later, I rely on the grace of God more than I ever have, because it's, I realize it isn't about anything innovative that I tried. It's something that God did and chose to do, and I was there and happy to be in the same room when he did the job. Somebody said, who was in the room when Thomas Edison, who was the boy in the room when Thomas Edison created the light bulb? And the answer is, I don't know. And I would tell people that I'm that little boy. I was just in the room while God was doing his work, creating, doing special things. And I think relying on who God is and having a close relationship with him daily made it possible for us to be now involved in this church for 41 years.
I don't remember hearing that Thomas Edison story, but that's powerful. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. It's something, just an illustration, but it's something I heard but that's me. That's what I feel like. I'm not the man in the room. I'm not a co-pilot. I'm not anything else. I'm watching what God's doing in the room, and privileged to be in that same room, and want to keep watching him do special things.
Amen.
Justin, you mentioned how do we keep motivated now?
Yeah, to keep the long-term view, right? Because I want to see that short-term fruit. I hope the Lord gives it, but
right.
It's the long game that we know we got to be playing here.
Right, and that is now that my wife and I, we've been in ministry now for 45 years.
Yeah,
and we can look back now, and Jim and I both, we're able to look back and see, thankfully, some fruit that God has produced through our ministries. And the thing that gives us great joy is to go back and look at all the people that were in our ministry throughout the 45 years who are now serving full-time in ministry, doing what we did and doing what they learned and saw us do when they were small, and so and we hear from them quite often, and so it's so encouraging, and it's easier for me, at least, to look at the long-term goal, because we've seen it happen through the years. I don't know how a good way to describe this, but as far as our ministry is concerned, we are at the looking back stage now.
Yeah.
I don't know how long God's going to keep us here. I hope many more years, but we have the advantage to be able to look back now over 45 years. And we've seen God's faithfulness. We've seen him grow people up in under our influence and under our mentorship, who are now serving in various ways, literally all over the world. And that is what motivates me, and I know it motivates Jimmy, my wife, Jimmy Lynn, to always keep the future focus in mind.
Well, if I can add one thing to that, Rodney,
Absolutely.
is it's not just looking back, but now I'm able to look forward with more confidence,
Right.
because of the look of seeing what God's done in the past. I'm looking forward to the next 10 years. Now, some things are more difficult and some things are harder, but it's not like we didn't have challenges back in earlier days. So the things that are challenges to us right now, sometimes
Like it's harder to move and get up in the morning.
I was thinking knees and back.
Knees and back, yeah.
And I'm getting ready to make a flight in 2 days. It's going to be like a 13 to 15 hour flight, and to the Africa, and that is something that is, you don't
look forward to those.
Yeah, getting out of a chair is a challenge.
Yeah.
And it didn't used to be, but the challenges of the future are. I know what God can do, and I've watched God do some really special things. I'm thankful for the past, but I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years of what can happen in even in lesser strength, more difficulties in some ways, but still what He can do.
Now, what you guys just said there is absolute gold. And I want to slow down and re-say it, at least how I heard it, and let you build on it a little bit to make sure our listeners caught that. Because essentially you said, we're at a place where we can look back and see what God's been doing for the last 50 years. Sometimes through our good ideas, sometimes through our bad ideas, sometimes through our strength, sometimes through our weakness. And because of that, we can look forward with more hope and optimism to the long term moving forward because He's been at it for a while. Now, for someone who's 28 years old listening to this, or on the younger end of the spectrum, they don't have the same longevity that you currently possess, which is exactly why we're trying to celebrate this 175 years of this particular church, to say, you may not have the personal history, but God does have the personal history here. So let's slow down and take a good look backwards, and be careful we don't get stuck looking backwards. Let's glance back and gaze at Christ. Nostalgia is easier than faith, but looking back is important so that you can press ahead with real confidence and real hope, even when you've got aches and pains and broken bones and relationships that are all out of whack and all of that. That is, I am so thankful for you guys just slowing down and saying that for us.
Well, I think that's the danger from our side. You're talking about 28-year-olds. I think the older our age it's the danger of being nostalgic only, and not looking forward. And so we nostalgia,
didn't always do it like that before.
Right, exactly. And now I'm glad for what God has done in the past, but I hope I don't stay focused back there.
Exactly.
In other words, the rear view mirror stuff.
Yeah.
I want to keep my eyes on the front windshield, not the rear view mirror.
Right.
It's nice to see the rear view mirror, but I want to look out the front windshield too.
Yeah, Jim said something a while ago that I thought was great, and that is, now that we are older and have a mature perspective, you like that? A mature perspective of the ministry, we can look back and see how God brought us through all those times of difficulty, and when things weren't going well and when things were tough, and we can see His faithfulness prevail in all those situations. It strengthens your faith muscles, and so that you can depend on God, knowing He will not leave you, He won't desert you, and He does have a long-range plan. We might not be able to see it completely, but it gives you the ability to put confidence in God and His faithfulness when we can look back and kind of see it over and over and over and over again.
Well, and I think you guys are just putting words to Ecclesiastes 7:10. It says, do not say, why were the former days better than these? Look at the good old days.
Yeah.
Weren't those the days? I mean, because it's not from wisdom that we ask that. It's the Lord who's faithful in all of it.
Right.
And, today we're recalling a lot of the exciting things. We're not spending a ton of time today on the really difficult days, but you guys walked arm in arm with your arms locked. I got walked and locked confused in my mind there, and I said the same thing. You guys had some real days where stuff was hitting the fan in a major way, and the Lord carried you through that too. And we don't need to spend a long time on that, but I don't want our listeners to come out of here with the impulse of you guys have suffered deeply in church-related contexts. Both of you have. You've both suffered deeply in health-related contexts for yourself and your families. You guys have both suffered relationally in a whole host of contexts. And yet you're able to stand here and say, look at the faithfulness of God. And so I just want our listeners to know this is not like, this is two dudes leading with a limp here.
Yeah. In fact, there's a great book out there that I have in my library, and it's called Leading with a Limp.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have it too. It is phenomenal. And it just reminds us of our frailty and the fact that of all of our successes, we don't get to pat ourselves on the back. But yet going through those deep waters, those tough times, those relational difficulties, ministry difficulties, we can have confidence to know that God is faithful always.
Rodney, I wonder if you wouldn't just build on that for a second. I'm imagining somebody listening right now who says, I wish I had this success mountaintop thing you're talking about, whether it's the Cradle Club or the med teams or the Living Christmas Tree or the 4th of July. I wish I could tell you about that in my life right now, but all I see is the deep waters. I see dark clouds and no mercy.
Wow.
How, cool. I'm glad you had the good times.
Yeah.
But it's not that for me right now.
Right.
Anything you would say to somebody listening right there?
Well, Jim can attest to this too, but when you're in ministry, especially when you're on the platform all the time, people think you've always got it together. And I'd like to have a nickel for every time I stepped onto the platform wishing I was not on the platform, because more times than not, we don't always have it together. And we are in desperate need of God. And even when things look like they're going so well, down underneath the surface, they can be an absolute dumpster fire, And in those times that I have found, and there have been times in my life and ministry where I was so desperate just to know that God was there. And quite honestly, one of those times was right after I left Bethesda, our Parkside at the time.
Yeah.
Through a horrible turmoil, and I'll just go ahead and say it, a pastor that was jealous of most of us who had leadership skills and didn't know how to take it. He didn't know how to respond to other men on staff who were leaders, and he had deficiencies. And so, at least as far as my case was concerned, there was not a lot of support for me, and there was I felt like that everything I was trying to do was being undermined, and that was extremely, extremely difficult. And so you just have to back up and say, okay, God, why am I here? And you have to, even when you want to throw in the towel, you have to realize that God is faithful. And sometimes you don't learn that till a long time after,
Oh, I drew great strength from the life of Joseph, who spent 17 years in servitude or jail. I draw great strength from Moses, who spent 40 years in the wilderness, just picking up sand. I'll draw great strength from David, who just watched sheep until God gave him a special opportunity. And sometimes we're on the backside of the wilderness. Sometimes it feels like jail or servitude. Sometimes it feels like we're just watching sheep and not doing anything significant. The lives of men of the past bring strength to me, who have served and served for a long time.
Mm.
And yet many of them went through a dark period where they just were the right kind of people in the darkness, in the wilderness, in the backside of not the kind of things you write home about, or the fruitful situations. And those have been encouragement to me when I feel in those spots, Justin, that I draw strength from, and the lives of people from many of them in the Old Testament.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
This little bit of the conversation here was nowhere in my notes. I didn't think we were going to talk about that.
Yeah, it kind of got
brought
dark all of a sudden, didn't it?
It did, but the thing is, it's easy to get excited about the stuff that's gone awesome.
Oh yeah,
and I love I love a good victory. I mean,
yeah.
You remember when Leitner hit that shot on your boys from Kentucky?
Come on.
Really?
That was a great victory.
Serious?
The deliverance the Lord provided.
We had to go there, didn't we? Had to go there.
That one's always in my notes, whether it's there or not.
Really?
Listeners, I'm a Duke fan, and Rodney's a Kentucky fan, so those early 90s years were big for us. But all of that to say, there is something really profound about the pain.
Well, if I can add to that, I'm a Tennessee fan, and Tennessee just walloped Duke or Kentucky this year too. So now they didn't make it much farther than that, but at least they beat Kentucky.
Well, let's just keep piling on while we're at it.
We won twice. We beat them twice in the regular season, but that wasn't when it really happened. When it really counted. But anyway, who's counting?
All of that to say, there is a way in which our suffering is what the Lord uses most profoundly in our lives.
No question.
And in our leadership, and in our ability to relate to others. And so I know that last bit was not in my notes or yours, and none of that was scripted. None of it was you pre-planned. I appreciate you guys for being willing to share out of the depth there, because I know there's somebody listening that needed that. And if I'm wrong and there was nobody listening that needed it, I know I needed it. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Love you guys. I'm trying to figure out where I was at in my questions. I was just so immersed in the conversation there.
Yeah, while you're thinking there, if I could add one thing.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
When we travel around the world, one of the things that your mom says is when with her Parkinson's, most people don't realize she has Parkinson's disease until she tells them.
Mm.
But she said, she'll quote, "My grace is sufficient," God speaking, "My grace is sufficient, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness." And we don't want to admit or feel the weaknesses. We'd rather choose the strong doors, not the weak doors. But His strength, His grace is sufficient, even during the weaknesses of Parkinson's or other diseases or needs that we have. And we're thankful that His grace really is sufficient, even in the dark days and the days when it's not as easy and some things are a little bit harder.
Yeah. See, that's the beauty of having years of having to trust God and being able to look back and see His faithfulness over and over and over again. And, God took us down a few paths that I never dreamed. In fact, I'll be real honest with you, coming here to Indiana was not what we thought was going to happen. When we left Calvary, Baptist Church down in Covington, Kentucky, and came here to Indiana, we thought at the time we'd be here a couple or 3 years. And here we are 33 years later, we're still here. But you know what? God's kept us here for a purpose, and we look at this as home. But it was not what we planned. But yet God had a purpose in it, and we are thankful for that purpose.
Yep.
But, I appreciate what Jim said. My wife, too, has gone through an incredible struggle with late-stage Lyme disease. Now, thankfully, God has brought an incredible degree of healing to her, and we've seen God literally work miracles in her life. But it's still a daily struggle. It's a constant struggle with all the medications, as Susan knows and Jim. I mean, it's something you fight every day, But we're so grateful to see And therefore, a few years ago, I really was at the point where I thought my wife was not going to live. I thought she was going to die, and this was going to take her down. And boy, those were dark, dark, dark days. And but we saw God's incredible hand of healing, and it gave us another huge boost of confidence to know that God is with us. He will never leave you, never forsake you. So thankful for that.
Yeah. I want to ask one last question here. You guys have told us about how you've seen God's faithful hand during bumper crop years and during years that look like famines, right? And looking back on both of those, you've told us gives you confidence to look to the future. I wonder if you'd leave our listeners with just one or two things. What are you really excited about seeing God do in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? What gets you fired up today? And listeners, I want you to listen to this as they're thinking for a second here, because I didn't tell them I was going to ask them that. I want you to think for a second. As you hear two guys in their 40s and 50s now, just get two guys in there.
Thank you. 40 and 50 years of ministry.
Yeah, right.
Full-time vocational
And
ministry.
Justin didn't major in math.
No, two guys in their 60s, 70s who've been at it for a bit and are saying, hey, it'd be easy to just kind of see where I'm at. No, I know you guys have your eyes on the future stuff God's going to do, and I want our listeners to have their eyes on the future. What's God going to do in these next 5, 10, 20 years? So listeners, hear from them here. What are you fired up about, hoping to see God do in this next period of time, fourth quarter of life and ministry?
In us personally, or just...
You take it however you want. How are you excited to see God work?
Well, I wrote a book 10 years ago that as I was writing, it's 500 pages, that I never dreamed. When I was writing it, I thought this hundreds of times. I hope somebody reads this. And never dreamed what would happen. Now we're at 17 translations. 18th translation will be done real soon. We had 2 people come to Christ in Iran while translating my book. The Arabic is almost ready, and it'll go out to places I'll never be able to reach or touch. And I'm excited to see what God has done when I never knew anybody would read it. We probably have 1,100 churches in Cuba using our book that I wrote, and it'll be going to the Middle East real soon. And we've already paid for 500 books to be printed and used in the Middle East, in places that are impossible for me to get to, but somebody's going to get to them. And I'm excited for the next 10 years to see what God's going to do in other kids hearing the stories of God from the Bible, by people who now have a free curriculum resource for them. So I honestly am really looking forward to my trip to the Middle East, my trip to Africa, other places that could be coming around, and what God will do. And I'm amazed at what He has done and probably will do.
And I'll just build on that. You told us 35 years ago were these med teams, missions education teams. And now we see downstream from that some of the impact upon families, individuals serving internationally in all these places. I'm thrilled to see, probably in eternity is when I would find out what's downstream from those efforts you just described with 99 Adventures. Because even if I'm still here in 35 years, what's happening in Tehran, I'm probably not going to get wind of. That's going to be something I only know in eternity. But I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Rodney, what are you excited to see God do?
Well, I tell you what, my ministry focus lately has had to take a big change, and partly because of my health. But God used me in some new areas of ministry, like catering and cooking, and also recording. I have a studio in my home. I've recorded some Christian audio books, and that's work that I love doing. But that involves me personally and how God's using me. But I tell you, in a broader scope, what I'm seeing, and you don't hear it in the media out there, but across college campuses right now, there is an incredible movement of God. and believe it or not, is coming a lot through sports, like the Ohio State football team.
Incredible revival this past year.
I mean, incredible, and it goes and I have to bring up my Kentucky Wildcats. The new basketball coach, Mark Pope, has brought an incredible awareness of God and just his presence and what he brought to the team this year as a first year head coach at Kentucky has been so encouraging, and I've learned that it has spread all over campus.
Wow. And
that's not the only spot. I mean, and like Alabama, there's other schools where God is really doing an incredible work, and we're seeing the Holy Spirit move. And I think a lot of it is you've got this younger generation coming up, and they've seen so much phoniness in, quote, Christianity, and maybe in their parents, maybe in their churches, and they're looking for something real. They're looking for something authentic.
That's right.
And I'm seeing a new generation of Christ followers that are looking for authenticity, and that's all they want. They want a God that's real, and forget all the little piddly, the little stuff that churches typically fight over all the time. That's worthless. It's useless. Get down to the basics and be real about who God is and how and what He's done in your life, and just be to the world how God has changed you. And that has been so encouraging to see. I mean, I've just been thrilled reading about so many college campuses. And of course, some of it had its roots back a few years ago at the revival at Asbury. I mean, that thing went on for weeks and weeks and got national attention. And I don't know whether I think that wasn't maybe necessarily the beginning of it, but I think that was an outgrowth of what God was already doing.
Yeah.
But yet that's where somebody threw some kerosene on the fire, and it really, really exploded in a good way. And now we're seeing the results of it literally all over the country. And that's encouragement to me.
It's a good reminder that we don't know where or how or when the Lord is going to put that multiplier effect like He can at any point in time. So let's keep our hand to the plow, doing the basics we know where to do. Faithful to the Word, prayer, seek His face.
Yeah.
Beg Him to do something big, and keep our eyes on the long term. I love it. Guys, thanks for being here. I've loved it. Appreciate you. You are two of my heroes, and I mean that with all sincerity. And today has been good for my soul and good for my heart. I hope it's good for our listeners too.
Me too.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Appreciate you, Justin.
We appreciate you and the job that God's using you to do here. Awesome job.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, man.
Listeners, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep looking for the faithfulness of God.